Welcome, everybody, to School Psych Podcast. My name is Rachel. I'm a school psychologist in Maryland. I'm so excited for this topic and our two guests tonight. It's going to be nerdily fantastic, and I love data, and it's so important. And we're going to talk about data and all that fun stuff tonight. But I'm going to pass it over to Rebecca. Rebecca is going to tell everybody how you can participate tonight. Rebecca.
Welcome, everybody. We hope that you are able to join us live because we love when you comment right alongside the YouTube video. If you're watching us right now, you just have to sign into your YouTube account. If you'd also like to make comments not live, if you're listening a little bit later or anytime later, just feel free to also comment along the video if you're watching as well. But if you're listening to audio only, you can use the hashtag Psyched Podcast and comment on either of the Facebook pages, the School Psyched Podcast page, or School Psyched, your school psychologist, or on Twitter at Podcast Psyched. We look forward to listening to all your ideas on progress monitoring and all your questions that you have for our amazing guests. And now I'm going to pass it on to Eric, who will introduce them.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. My name is Eric, and I'm a school psychologist in Connecticut. And we're excited to have Drs. VanDerHeyden and Burns with us. We have had them as guests a number of times in the past. So if you are not new to them, you know who they are and what they do. If you are new to them, Dr. Burns is a professor at University of Missouri, and Dr. VanDerHeyden, still school psychologist, but is now never former, right? We're always school psychologists, but she's now running an amazing program called Spring Math. So she may be able to tell you more about that. But we have spoken with her about Spring Math and math interventions in the past. Both are highly involved in the science of math, science of reading, in research and instructing others and supporting teachers, school psychologists, educators. So we are super excited to have them back and continue the many discussions that we've had. Tonight, we want to talk about data, interventions, progress monitoring, assessment, many things that school psychologists and educators need to know and understand. So welcome, Amanda and Matt.
Thank you.
Do we want to start right off with, I think, Matt, just before we were talking before the show, we started talking about sort of the purpose of assessment. Do we want to start with maybe talking a little bit about that and move into?
Wait. I thought we were going to talk about Matt's weight loss and his secrets for weight loss. That's what I'm here to hear about tonight.
He looks awesome.
Yeah. You're shrinking. You're shrinking all in here. Looks good.
Thanks. But yeah, so purpose of assessment or types of assessment. So it's one thing I'm always, when I start talking about, people ask questions about progress monitoring, I always remind and come back to a couple things. Decisions and evaluating. You can't evaluate a tool in a vacuum. Data, first of all, tools aren't reliable and valid. That always drives me nuts. Decisions are validated. Data are reliable or not. And you have to always interpret what you're doing based on the decision being made. So I sort of lump things in a couple of big decisions. There's sort of like almost like a 2x3 matrix. So I want to know, are you making decisions about what instruction to deliver? That's one type of decision. Are you making decisions about who needs help? It's another one, of course, screening. Or are you making a decision about how to see if the kid's getting better, progress monitoring? So those are three decisions. And then sort of laid on top of those is the stakes involved. So if I'm progress monitoring and I'm going to use the data to make an MTSS decision, like go from tier 1 to tier 2 or tier 2 to tier 3 or tier 3 to special ed, I have to have a lot more, the data have to be much more rigorous and sound and good interpretation frameworks and rubrics and all that. Then if I'm just a school psych practitioner working with a kid and I want to see is he doing better. Like, so if I'm using the data to determine a resource allocation, that kicks it up in terms of rigor to interpret what you're doing. But then also keep in mind it's screening, diagnostic, or it's progress monitoring. Diagnostic meaning, I gotta be careful when I talk to school psychs. And when I say diagnostic, I don't mean diagnosing LD. I mean using the data to determine what the kid's needs are and using those data to drive intervention. So I always try and piece up when you talk about assessment. And on Facebook, we were talking just a minute ago. We get these questions on Facebook, which in presented in a vacuum don't make much sense. One of which is, hey, are there any free measures? But Amanda will talk about that. The other of which is hey, what's the best assessment out there for reading or something? Well, for what type of decision?
Yeah.
Yeah. For what type of decision? And you can't, like, I would interpret progress monitoring data very differently if I'm deciding tier 2 to tier 3 than if I'm just a practitioner working with a kid.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I agree. And I think, the thing that's interesting, in a way, we are all complicit in having sort of just blown up the field with lots of data, right? And it's so easy and it's so seductive to just keep collecting data. But what we're not good about is helping systems use those data in the most efficient way to know, just enough information to take the next action, right? And that's where you change outcomes. You don't change outcomes by collecting more assessment data most of the time. It's what you do in between. It's whether or not you as an adult are responsive to the data that you have collected that moves the bar. And I hate those questions because, there are no free assessments, right? They are all a tremendous investment of time, energy, bandwidth, teacher buy-in. That is not a small investment to make, and you should be very choosy about what you use. And I bet you get these questions all the time too, Matt, but at the end of the year, I get questions every year from people saying, well, we're using X screener and we're thinking about switching to Y screener. And I always think it's just a waste of time because almost all the time they're switching between two perfectly adequate screeners. And changing screeners is not going to help you attain your goals in that particular situation. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I know we're talking about progress monitoring, but like the paper we were talking about earlier with me, you, and West Bonifay, where we saw, what was the highest one we saw, Amanda? One school had 9.
No, 12.
12? Wait, per session, per
school year.
Yeah, per school year. Okay, so
yes.
Okay.
But some kids got 12 screenings, and I was trying to pull that up on ResearchGate because I'm going to post that graph on Facebook when we get off of our session here. I just ran out of time, but yeah, can you imagine? And I just think, and what's interesting? Okay, new people who are doing some work in that space who I think are just fantastic. And I know, Courtney Barrett, she's published with you and she's published with me. She's brilliant. And Adria Truckenmiller. Mm-hmm. Do you know Adria? Yeah. Brilliant. Was at Florida Center for Reading Research for a long time. She's in Michigan too now with Courtney.
She's at Michigan State.
Yep. And that's right. You're a Michigan guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, we just finished a paper. I'm fourth author. All these brilliant young women. It's Courtney and Adria and Lindy Johnson. I think it's her last name. I hope that's right. Fantastic. One of Adria's students. And it's a cost benefit analysis of screening. So the benefit is accuracy, right? And then you're calculating your ICERs based on how much accuracy does the screening investment give you, right? Mm-hmm. And everything's included: cost to buy it, time to administer it, all of that. Mm-hmm. So I think we just got to get more sophisticated about how we look at these questions.
Yeah, and sophisticated oftentimes ends up in an easier answer.
Right. Right. Okay. In that study, oral reading fluency won.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just put on Facebook, on Twitter actually. I work in a district who screens kids in reading with Fontes Pinel, which everyone knows I don't think is a good use of time.
You correctly interpret as terrible.
Fontes Pinel, CBMR or reading fluency, MAP, those three. Like, why on earth would you ever give every kid all 3 of those measures? And when you look at it, the data were very different. And oral reading fluency and MAP actually aligned quite nicely, but F&P was way crazy. And so I'd say to schools, look at the kids you're identifying. If you're identifying the same kids, pick the same measure, identifies roughly the same kids. Pick the one that's, cost the least. And when I say cost, I mean everything you mentioned earlier, Amanda. Pick the one that costs the least and just use that one.
Right.
More data doesn't necessarily make it a better decision.
No. And weighing a cow doesn't make it fatter.
Right.
Right? Yeah. And what we're bad about doing is using those data to change the way we deliver instruction. Mm-hmm. we really need to set people free about that. I mean, we've just gotten consumed. It's so seductive to just go and get more progress monitoring information. Let's go another week and see what happens. It's not good for kids. And, it's not good for systems who are really trying to be good stewards of a 36-week instructional opportunity for children.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Can I jump in and just ask a question, because I'm trying to think about this in terms of support for teachers. When students came in this year, they, for many districts, it's the first sort of normal school year where there aren't a lot of extra worries about kids, coming into the year and different protocols and stuff. And so one of the things teachers really want to know, and I wonder what kind of decision, as Matt was talking about the types of decisions this would be, but just how much learning have they potentially lost, or where are they compared to where they might be if we hadn't gone through this pandemic and all of the changes that came with it. And so I think that's the impetus to let me do an FMP and let me do this and let me do the map testing, and then I'm going to put them all together and I'm going to get this comprehensive picture of all the things. And so I hear what you're saying, that's silly, but I'm not sure how I would say that to a teacher. Why not? So they want to see exactly where these kids are in general, and maybe even before they're certain they're not doing well or they are doing well.
Yeah, but that's a different type of question, though, Rebecca. That's you want to see if they're doing well versus what they need. What they need is diagnostic, right? And so I screen with the cheapest, easiest screener we can get with at least accurate decision making. And then the kids who score low, I do additional assessment with just those kids. I'm still not going to use FMP, but I'm still going to, I'll assess the kids that scored low on just whatever my good screener is, that one screener. And then I'll use those data to try and figure out what the kids need. And I can talk about that in a few minutes. But that, I think we have to remember there's two different types of decisions being treated simultaneously when we're collecting 4 measures per kid. And we really only need to collect that additional layer with the kids for whom we need to figure out what's going on.
So I agree. And here, this is what I said to teachers last week in Arizona to answer this question. I actually have a couple of slides, which I pulled up, but we don't need the slides. I can paint the picture for you. And it's this: if you are worried, we know there's been learning loss, right? And it's very classic school psychologist behavior to want to investigate that further and have a nice picture of it. That's just sort of that's who we are. That's our Achilles heel, right? But what I showed in my couple of slides is the recent NAEP data that show the drop in math, right? And then I say, if you are worried about this right now, forget about this. Let me show you what the last 20 years looks like. And it's totally flat. And the average 4th grade kid is not proficient on the NAEP. So that's what we should be worried about. Mm-hmm. Like this little dip that we've just experienced, that's almost just a blip on the radar. It's a red herring. Like, we should really actually be pretty upset that for my kids, my son just graduated last year, his entire birth to grade 12 experience, there really was fundamentally no improvement in NAEP performance in mathematics. That is unconscionable. And that's something that we can do something about. We have 20 years of information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Amanda, are you still recommending, I shouldn't say it that way. Right after the pandemic, I was telling schools, why screen to collect data to a question to which you already know the answer? Like, if you know they're all low, do classified intervention first, and then are you still making that recommendation too, Amanda?
Well, we do screen to start, but only because we're going to use it for program evaluation.
Okay, got it.
So pretty much 100% of, just with very rare exceptions of extremely high performing schools, for the most part, most classes go into class-wide math intervention for us. And at high school, we do not screen. So grades 9 through 12, it always begins with class-wide intervention, which, that's what Mark Shin advised and Kim Gibbons, and you've advised that too, Matt. So that's how we do that. But for the baby grades, K through 8, we do, but it's a very efficient screening. Nobody spends more than 12 minutes total, which is really important. And it gives us this wonderful little baseline that we can use, because something we're bad about is thinking about how we're going to encourage teachers to keep going. So we have to have ways. I mean, it's so interesting to me. There are no other industries really where professionals are asked to really just engage in consistent, difficult behaviors day in, day out, and nobody gives them feedback. And like once a year, test scores for kids grades 3 and up is not sufficient. So what teachers really deserve is when we ask them to do something, to intensify instruction, for example, we need to be able to show them within a week that it's working. Right? So we use the screening data. We have this little growth tab that we're holding that information. We're going to use it also for end of year program evaluation, but that information we have, and then we have exactly how those children perform in their final class-wide intervention session for that particular skill. And it gives us this wonderful way every, 3 to 5 weeks to give teachers this burst in performance, because it is very, very common that 0 to 10% of kids were proficient on the screening. And at the last, class-wide intervention session, it's very common for that number to be 90 to 100%. Mm-hmm. And that is rewarding to teachers. It is rewarding the correct behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But Amanda, one thing I want to kind of ask a question to you, and I'll comment on after you do, is you said 12 minutes. That's 12 minutes per kid on the computer, right? And
no. It's 12 minutes class-wide.
Oh, class-wide. Sorry. Yes. But those also data are, it's a group administered.
Right.
And those are data that can screen and get diagnostic quite nicely in just 12 minutes.
That's
correct?
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
Good. So I would argue in reading, it's the same. So oral reading fluency, maybe nonsense word fluency where needed, in about 5 minutes per kid. Now in reading, it is done one-on-one. So the advantage of math is that you can do the computer or in a group. So usually is one-on-one. So that's a bit more resource intensive, but it's 5 minutes per kid. I can get a really good indication of what the kid needs without spending 20 or 30 minutes to get a decision with the accuracy of a coin toss.
Right. Yeah. I can't believe anybody's still using those measures. I mean, thank God for you that you keep publishing those data and saying, and you get hit every time. I'm sure you have the vendors come after you and everything, but thank God you're still putting those data out there, because, it's not fair that adults have children that land in these schools and are subjected to this malpractice.
Yeah, for those who might be watching, aren't really sure what we're talking about. I'm talking about the Fontes and Pinnell, the benchmark assessment system. We did a study, it was 2015, where we saw two separate studies published in 2 different journals. One found 54% diagnostic accuracy. So it's about the equivalent of flipping a coin. You're better off to take a quarter, and just flip it, than you are to give the kid this measure. And number 2, more upsetting from my perspective, is the lowest readers couldn't read the books that were at their level, at their supposed level by the FMP. So I argued you want to talk about evidence that you're actually hurting kids. I think that's pretty clear evidence. If you take a kid who's already a frustrated reader and say, here, go read this, and then they can't read it, that's setting them up for remorse failure.
And one of the interesting things that we found in our study, which was probably 2016, where we looked at remember the one kid, several kids got 12 reading screenings in a year. And we were looking at accuracy versus the time investment. And also we looked at how frequently kids receive screening and whether that was associated with a specific growth trajectory for them on 2 consecutive years of year-end reading test data. And alarmingly, we found no benefit in receiving more frequent screening for kids who were above about the 10th percentile of performance in the first year. And in fact, we saw a cross. So there was a little bit of benefit for kids about, below the 10th percentile on the year-end test. And that makes sense. But then for all these other children, we actually saw the benefit line cross, which is evidence of harm. So we actually saw that kids that were, higher, I don't even want to say higher performing, they were above the 10th percentile. That's not high performing, okay? But they actually showed weaker trajectories if they happen to be kids who were more frequently screened relative to kids at their same performance level who were less frequently screened. And that spoke to me, because that's kind of that's the suspicion, right? Is that and I think it's a teacher controlled behavior. What we didn't do in our study, and I think Lindy is doing some of this in her follow-up research, is we didn't go ask the teachers why. Because if you remember, we ran some analyses to see did the amount of screening that the teachers gave, was there like some kind of reason that might explain that? We specifically looked at student performance, and we anticipated that the kids who were getting more screening were also the lower performing students. And it wasn't the case. And that says to me that there's a teacher level variable. There's like an appetite for more assessment or less assessment. I think it's some of these very teachers that have this appetite to do all of this F&P work and running records and, leveled reading. And really, hopefully somebody is helping them let go of those practices, de-implement those low value practices, as Brian Farmer would say, and choose things that can be of greater benefit to kids in the system.
Right. Agreed. Hey, let's segue to progress monitoring. I have an idea that something you just said that struck me. So one issue with F&P, I'll keep picking on them, is you get a level, right? And this level is not very precise. It's a letter. It's A to, I'm not sure if it goes A to Z or what the top is, but and A is not the first one, but it doesn't matter. You get a level. Well, that's not very precise, number one. But number two, we forget the concept of standard error of measure, which of course all the school psychs we're going, well, the whole world is standard error of measure. But so if a kid gets a score of G, let's say, okay, we found, and I've never published these data, I freely admit that, but we presented it in ASP one time as a poster or something. We found for most grade levels, a standard error of measure, a confidence interval of plus or minus two grade level, 2 letter levels. So G is really, I gotta do a little here, GHI, right? And then what? FE, is that right?
Yeah, something like that.
E to I, right? So somewhere between E to I.
That's useless.
It's useless.
The whole class is in that range.
Exactly. And then the teacher, some teacher will well-meaningly give a pre and post test and think they can use this to progress monitor, and they'll say, "God, my kid was at an E and now they're up to an I. Isn't that fantastic?" And then I'm thinking in my head, I want to say yes, but I'm thinking, no, it's the same score. Psychometrically, those are the same score.
Right.
And I think that's a concept that we as school psychs can help people understand. We're talking about progress monitoring. That if you have two pre and post measures that their confidence intervals overlap, that's not real growth.
Right. Yeah. I get it. And I think, like, as you know which route I've gone, because in the very early days we were trying to build a GOM in math, and we did some of that work together, Matt. It's just failed. It just did not work because we could not sensitively detect progress and change, and it just didn't work for us, right? But I feel like I've declared my place around mastery measurement in math is the way to go. But a side effect, a benefit from that is, I never felt like slope was very reliable either. And so we looked at it over the years, and it just required too much of an investment of assessment time and too much of a period of waiting before you could know whether or not you needed to change the intervention. And the cool thing about CBM is, if people could just take a step back and remember that before it became a score, which is a beautiful thing, that it gives us scores, right? There are benefits and properties that we can, benefit from for our decisions. It was just a behavior observation originally, right? It was Skinner's responses per minute, and then precision teaching, Clay Starlin, Eric Houghton, responses correct per minute. So it was a behavioral observation. So what we wanted to do was replicate that performance, that behavior, demonstrate stability, demonstrate stimulus control of that behavior. So if we could systematically change conditions around it, for example, like in the old days, we used to do the can't do, won't do assessment. So the idea of adding an incentive, performance goes up, take away the incentive, performance goes down. You're demonstrating that is you have stimulus control around that behavior observation. So there is not a necessity to only have slope to be able to make a decision about progress. There are other ways to do it. And I've not used, the STEEP model did not use slope formally in the decision rules, and that is because it was too unstable. I helped generate and develop those decision rules for my dissertation a million years ago. And I will say, like in my work now, we use really trials to criterion data. We use reference to how fast are other classes receiving the same intervention in the same setting with the same degree of fidelity. How many weeks to criterion do those kids have? And we can use better decision making. We can make decisions faster, but we're not giving you like a rate that is somehow generalizable that you can compare in a table without regard to, any other information about where those rates came from or how they were produced. And I think there's a lot of potential there.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So let me back up a little bit. A couple of things that we just talked about. So a general outcome measure, or grade level or reading fluency, grade level CBMR, and reading, that's a well accepted general outcome measure. If your score goes up on that, you're probably doing better in reading, right? So Amanda, way more than I have. I've always sort of been on the sub-skill mastery side of things, but Amanda did research to try and see, can we identify a general outcome measure for math? And conclusion, I won't speak for Amanda, but what I've heard you say a second ago was
big fat no.
Yeah.
We looked at other people's measures. We built our own measures thinking, with the hubris of youth, we could do it better. We also failed. No, it's just not, the thing is, I'm not saying you can't do it and get some gradual linear upward trend over perhaps a semester, but it's useless information because you need more sensitive detection of growth so you can adjust what you're doing. Especially since we're now, in our second edition of the book that Eric likes a lot, the RTI approach to evaluating learning disabilities, we very clearly say you really should not be using annual growth. I know you hate aim lines, Matt. You should talk about that. I won't steal your thunder, but I will say, we're saying, if at least in reading, it should be a seasonal trend line that you're paying attention to, not an annual trend line.
Oh, I agree. Oh, I'm glad you said that. Oh, at least in reading. So reading and math are, first big moment or first big piece of information tonight is reading and math are different, right? And so yes, you can collect a general outcome measure. Now, I also think you have to have skill data. If I'm probably being unclear, if I don't clarify what I just said, please someone jump in and ask me to. But you in math, it's progress towards obtaining these individual skills that really, really, really matters. In reading, we can use progress on a general outcome measure over a shorter period of time, as you said, Amanda. I agree with that. But along the way, those data really don't tell you what changes you have to make. They just simply tell you a change is needed. So I monitor progress two ways for reading. I do a general outcome measure once a week, and Ted Christ in 2006, 16 years ago, did an awesome paper when he basically found, boy, if you need 10, 12, 14 data points to have a slope even reliable enough to make a decision. So if you're using the data for an important decision, like going from tier 2 to tier 3 to special ed, you've got to have 12, 13, 14 weeks with the data.
Question, with that, how frequently then could you do it? Twice a week or 3 times a week to get to that 10 to 14, or does it have to be weekly?
No, it's number of data points that matter. Yes. So the more data, the better. But what Ted will correct what I just said is really, he thinks, in fact, his study actually relied on 2 data points a week.
Yeah.
So I'm actually paring down when I say 14 weeks. So if you're doing it 3 times a week, you probably can accelerate decision making. If you're doing it twice a week, you can accelerate decision making over 1.
Yeah.
Certainly, but I wouldn't go less than 10, 12 weeks worth of data.
Yeah, there was a good study. I'm trying to think who it was, because I just almost don't even work in reading anymore. But there was a study where somebody looked at if you added more data points in the week, that was one way to get better.
Yes, Joe Jenkins did that. Yeah, was that Joe Jenkins?
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
Yes, absolutely. You can have more rapid decisions.
Yeah.
So yeah, and if you're collecting data once a month, which some people have suggested that's sufficient, then you're going to have the kid in intervention the entire year because you're not going to have data for at least 9 months.
And honestly, when we're working with kids in math, they are often going to need to progress 6, 7, 8 levels before they really close the grade level gap and get to mastery. So we cannot wait for weeks and weeks and weeks to move them.
Yes. So I said, so we monitor progress for the GOM every week, and then at least every other week, if not once a week as well, I do a second measure, 1 minute. That's a skill. and I'm going to assess the skill in which I'm intervening. So I use the framework of the National Reading Panel, although I would argue for more precision, but for time's sake, this will be good enough for now. So if you're intervening for phonemic awareness, you skill measure with a phonemic awareness measure, like phoneme segmentation fluency. If you're doing a decoding intervention, you monitor progress, once a week or every other week with like nonsense word fluency. If you're doing a fluency-based intervention, I said earlier, general outcome measure is grade level oral reading fluency. I think that's really important. So if it's a fourth grader, I'm going to do a fourth grade CBM. But if I'm doing a fluency-based intervention, heavy fluency oriented, I will monitor progress. My skill measure will be their instructional level CBM. So I'm not ever saying, people ask me, well, whenever someone asks me a question about assessment, I usually answer that question with this question: what's your decision?
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah, right. It depends.
I'm not trying to be evasive, but
it depends. But so I don't use instructional level CBMR. I use grade level CBMR for important decisions. But if I'm just an interventionist working with a kid, just using the data to see if he's doing better or not, and not really making resource decisions, then instructional level is fine. Monitoring progress towards IEP goals, instructional level is fine. If I'm doing a fluency intervention, like repeated reading with the kid 3 times a week, I'll do a grade level CBMR and an instructional level CBMR. And those skill levels, the phoneme segmentation fluency for phonemic awareness, the nonsense word fluency for decoding, instructional level CBMR for fluency, those are the data I'll use to say, what we're doing isn't working. We need to mix up the instruction.
Right.
But we're not going to take a kid from tier 2 to tier 3 yet with that type of discipline.
Yeah, that's exactly how we do it. I mean, that's how I did it in reading years ago. But like in math, it's the same idea. We call it the target skill and the generalization or the goal skill. And we do the same thing. So it's like this, really proximal, optimally sensitive measure that is exactly what you're teaching. And then there is a slightly distal measure that is, for us, it's a grade level, more complex iteration of what we are specifically drilled down and working on a sub-skill with you on. And we give both every week. Of course, really we give the targeted one every day, but we are going to make decisions about higher stakes kind of RTI decisions based on your goal skill performance and whether or not you've closed that gap within a reasonable time frame. Yep. And I will say, Ben Solomon has a grad student, totally blanking on her name. It's terrible. She's wonderful. And she just finished a dissertation. I was on her committee, and I'm going to think of her name's going to come to me and I'll say it later. But she did a beautiful, just incredibly innovative study to examine how stable the decision to advance a class during class-wide math intervention is. Like, she asked the question, are you missing kids? Are you making decision errors if you move the whole class forward when the median hits mastery one time? Or should you have required the median to hit mastery twice, or 2 consecutive days? So she actually measured that. And it's just a beautiful study. But what she found is that you can make a decision with a single data point of the median score being in the mastery range. And it's very, very, very accurate. I mean, this was good news for us. If she had found something differently, we would have just changed our rules. But for efficiency, I think the reason it works is because everything is so tightly controlled around that decision. And we're not overstepping the data. You know what I mean? We're just making the decision that kids are ready by and large to go to the next skill. And the kids who are falling behind, those are kids that we're going to do individual intervention with. So I don't see such a seamless framework. I mean, for reading, I'm not aware. You can do that work, but no one has really built a platform. I tried to get you to build spring reading years ago. You should have done it. You still could. You call it something else now, but.
That's right. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm bursting with questions, and I know we have some audience questions too. But before we get to that, I'm going to sneak mine in because I'm greedy. So when I'm hearing I'm often trying my best to help special educators write IEP goals and write objectives and things of that nature. And so when you're talking about, Matt, you were talking about, probes as far as for phonics, like word reading fluency. I'm just wondering, is there a preferred way or a more accurate way? Sometimes I see goals written according to like skill, like R controlled valve,
Yeah.
4 out of 5, this. And so the objectives maybe follow maybe the scope and sequence of whatever phonics program. And so you want to move them along that way. I've seen goals that, you could use the word reading fluency, and just incrementally like increase that based on whatever there. And then I've seen, like I see programs like Wilson, my district uses a lot. And so they have kind of progress monitoring built into Wilson, and it's just kind of lists of words on whatever particular level. And so I might see, goals like that. Is there an ideal way to measure some of these skills? Are probes and fluency measures better, or skill better, or is it just whatever?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I was all set to answer it until you said those last couple of words. So I'll say a couple of things, and Amanda, jump in.
Yep. I'm going to disagree with you, maybe, so I'm nervous, but that's okay. It would not be the first time.
So that's a different decision. Like I teach undergrad special ed, and I don't teach them I teach them how to monitor progress, but I don't teach them to write IEP goals for general outcome measures, right? I think you want to get the most precise measure. In fact, I have a teacher one time working with Road to Reading. And Road to Reading is a wonderful thing. After every lesson, you teach some sound or something, some grapheme. And it'll present 10 words that contain that target grapheme and ask you to read them. And she's like, I have these data. Can I use these? Yes, that's a wonderful skill data, right? That's a wonderful skill data. What'd you call it, Amanda? Target, general target?
Yeah,
okay.
Targeted. That's
Same
a target
thing.
versus goal.
It's a wonderful piece of data. So I would rate goals to that level of precision. I'm always going to base on mastery. So the only reason you would do sort of grade level stuff if you've got some established criteria. But I'm not convinced those established criteria are really that helpful when talking about a fifth grade reading at the first grade level, for example. Is a fifth grade criterion really helpful in that scenario? I don't know. So I do a couple things. I do rate of growth, and I'm going to use rate of growth based on rate of growth to maintain mastery. So, for example, Cadience reading, their norms are based. They call them norms. They're not norms. In fact, I probably call them norms. They don't. Is based on what it takes to pass the state test at each benchmark assessment. And so if they go from like 30 I'm making these numbers up, 30 in the fall to 45 in the winter to 60 in the spring or something, then I compute the rate of growth for that to maintain that level and set that as my target. So let's say it's 1.5. Kid starts at 20, and I've got the kid for 30 weeks, right, until the next IEP. Or again, I'm using 30 to make the math easy on me. So 30 times 1.5 is 45. Like I say, 20 to start with. I'll set my goal for 65. Okay. So I'll do that. The part that threw me was when you said, is it better to do a rate-based versus accuracy versus growth? Which I don't have a great answer to that question. Amanda might. But I do say, I will say when they write accuracy-based ones, don't use 80%. That's too low. That's almost always too low. I use if I have to set one, you got to accept some error, right? There's always going to be measurement error. So because of that, I'll accept 90%, but I never use 80%. So, okay, Amanda, if you want to.
Well, I'm feeling a little awkward because I might disagree with you.
Go ahead.
But no, if we were having a beer at a conference, of course, I wouldn't be drinking a beer. I'd be drinking a glass of wine. I would just disagree with you, but that's okay. I think maybe it's different in math, to some extent. Maybe that has influenced my thinking about this. But so I'm very interested in building decision rules to drive the intensification decision, but also to evaluate, finally, like toward potentially an eligibility determination using your RTI data. And what I've observed in the early days, this is like 20 years ago, is that if children were hitting our criteria in digits correct back then for 2 minutes, if they were reaching instructional level performance or mastery level performance, they were not making errors. Okay. And actually, you see this in reading too. Like, it's not the kid who's reading 100 words correctly per minute that's making 25 miscues. It's almost always that kid who's reading like 2 words correctly per minute that's making 10 errors because they're not going to sit there and do nothing. So they answer incorrectly. They attempt, kids in math do that all the time. Like if they don't know how to subtract and you give them a subtraction measure, guess what they're going to do? They're going to add. They're going to write zeros. They're going to do something. And those are all errors. Okay. So this really got me thinking because, I think when rules for running RTI are complex, then you just invite user error, right? So I wondered if you could actually part with the accuracy criterion altogether. And it's been really pretty much conventional in CBM from the very beginning. I mean, pre-Dino and Merkin, everybody included an accuracy element in some way, like some raw number of errors cap, or even like the precision teaching folks argued for the calculation of accuracy ratios. And I think in a way, when they were using those real complicated logarithmic charting procedures, the standard acceleration chart, they would routinely mark the measurement floors and measurement ceilings like every session. And they were probably pretty facile at interpreting, change based on those floors and ceilings. But we don't do that. And we don't use that because we use linear charting now. And so when we are using accuracy in any way, we can actually weaken the decision about the performance because let me just say, for really low rate behaviors, accuracy becomes extremely unstable, right? And there's a measurement ceiling of 100%. And so typically, if you look at acquisition of math, I mean, I've got thousands of data points doing this. Very rapidly, kids are in the zone of 80%, right? And then they're ceilinged. And so what happens is you get a lot of kids who are at 100%, but they are performing, maybe like 10 digits correct in 2 minutes. They are not nearly ready for fluency building or to be considered at mastery to where you would advance the content difficulty. So there's a huge number of kids for whom you're actually making a false negative decision error if you just look at accuracy. And I should qualify my comments that I'm talking about accuracy the way that CBM does it, where it's basically an accuracy score that's derived from timed assessment. Now, this problem goes away for accuracy if you have a fixed number of trials in an untimed context, but that's not how we do it in CBM. Right. And so I really, I am of the mind now, and looked at some data, and we did write a paper, Ben Solomon and I, and we put it out, and we got hammered in the first round of reviews, so it's different. I mean, it's a kind of a different way to think about CBM, but I hope people will systematically replicate our work and critique it. Maybe Matt, you'll critique it and take a look at it and see what we got wrong. But my thinking is, if you have really of high technical adequacy, your process for collecting CBM data, the accuracy rule does not add to your decision. It doesn't help you make a better decision, even diagnostically, about what kids need.
Okay, I got to respond. You got to respond. Okay, because that might be that. So the question was about writing IEP goals. Mm-hmm. So writing IEP goals is a different conversation than CBM to monitor progress. Secondly, I agree. You can't use accuracy when you're monitoring progress. Accuracy is a very poor way to monitor progress. Even I don't advocate for that. But I argue for reading diagnostically matters because of all the studies we've done that have shown kids have different behaviors when they're reading 93 to 97% of the words correctly than if they're reading less than that or more than that. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know how many studies we've done that so far. But diagnostically, if a kid reading 91% of the words, let's be more extreme. A kid reading 85% of the words correctly has a different behavior than those reading 95%, which may not be reflected in the overall percentage fluency rate. Now, having said that, I agree with you that there's a high correlation. I should have looked it up. I meant to look it up before this because I knew this would come up. But it's not like 0.9. It's like 0.7 or 0.6.
Between accuracy and fluency?
Yes.
Yeah.
For reading.
There is. Like, in effect, that's what we say in our paper. It's at best, it's redundant information. But for a substantial number of kids, they can be 100% accurate and actually still be very much in need of acquisition instruction.
So see, I just did a study on that. It's not published yet. I found that there were most kids who were they were very, very effective. No kids who just fit that profile you just described for reading. that if they were hardly anyone that were accurate, but still in that acquisition. In fact, literally 1 out of like 500 or something.
Yeah,
So,
and we had a lot. Now, but see again, maybe this. Now we did have a little reading data in our paper, but the types of analyses that I'm talking are the ones I did, which are mostly in math.
right.
Maybe it's different in math than in reading.
So I think it is also different for progress monitoring than diagnostic. I think that's a really important distinction. That
Yeah, and here's the thing. So some people are asking like to be a little bit pragmatic about progress monitoring, and I think that's fair. Like, let's do that.
Cool.
So for me, it's very interesting because NCII has a call that you can submit your work to around like the screening accuracy for various measures, and then they have a separate progress monitoring call. But the thing is, if you really built a measure that is going to be adequate for screening, so you really do have to demonstrate, in my mind, that you can generate multiple forms that are technically equivalent and reliable and contribute to meaningful decisions, right? And I think if you've done that, repeating that measure is going to be pretty good in terms of progress monitoring, right? And somebody asked, like, are we specifically going to talk about how to calculate rate of improvement? And that's a fair question to ask. I mean, I avoid it because I think it's tremendously unstable. In my training, what controls rate of improvement is absolutely all the instructional conditions around the behavior and the child's prior experience and knowledge and proficiency. And I just don't understand how you can really just look at ROI. Like you said, the problem is people try to look at this information in a vacuum. So I'm really willing to look at ROI, rate of improvement, not hard to calculate, relative to like the median rate of improvement in the same class, given the same intervention, with the same degree of fidelity, by the same teacher, with kids who receive core instruction together. That's very meaningful to me. Mm-hmm. And if a child is performing below that median, I think you can pretty well conclude that child has more risk than the average kid in the class. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, agreed. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. ROI. So it's simple to calculate. By the way, if you're using Dibbles, Acadience, FastBridge, AimsWeb, they give you ROI as part of it. Yeah. If you're using Excel, which I still do, I put the data in one row, put the number, the week. It's got to be number of the week in the row above it, and use slope function. And I have a couple of videos on my YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search Matthew Burns, I have a video there about how to do that. You can go there and look.
Yeah, you should say it's just ordinary least squares regression.
It's super simple.
So simple.
But again, if you're using all those things I just listed, they do it for you.
Right.
And so you don't even have to do it yourself. But you can't. But it's one piece of the puzzle, right? And I understand in an RTI world, an MTSS world, we're using these data for decisions. We have to have decision-making rules, and the district probably has them. The state might have some requirements. So I understand that, but it's no metric or rubric can replace thinking. I love your approach, Amanda. Where what really matters is the score compared to the median score of that classroom, or even the other kids in the classroom. And if the kids being the same,
not a new idea. I mean, this is where CBM began, was emphasizing local norms.
Yeah, that's true.
The thing is, though, that working in schools, we're often in schools that don't have that. I guess we could create that our own, but oftentimes they have Dibbles data, they have these things, and so teachers want to be able to make decisions easily with the data that they already have, and sometimes that data that they already have isn't really appropriate or isn't really best practice. When I've calculated like rate of improvement, and I've just kind of self-taught myself stuff. This was not something that was taught to me in grad school, but I know that I'm starting with this particular number. I can look at my chart, and we have some charts and things from studies in our Google Drive that'll say that on this measure, the average growth is, 2 words per minute per week. And so I can say, okay, within 4 weeks, that means I would expect my score to go up, 8 words per minute. So that's kind of going to be about where my goal is and whatnot. But it sounds like that's not super accurate. And I understand we have confidence intervals with all of these data points too. I guess.
But Rachel, I'm so glad you said that, Because and you saying that, I reflected on what I just said a second ago, and I basically just gave a bunch of people permission to run a running record and look at the data however they want. And that was not what I intended.
I did not hear that.
When you said that, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's exactly right. I just basically said, anyway, so no. So I want to be real clear. I think you should use, there's a benefit to using the Acadians, Dibbles, Fastbridge, AimsWeb, all those. They're well constructed. They've got norms. Now, I don't love norms, but at the same time, I'd rather someone look at that for growth. I mean, I'd rather someone look at that than do a running record once a week and say, oh, let's have them go up by 3 a week or something. And keep in mind too, what was said earlier, if you want to go up 2 a week and it's 4 weeks, so that's 8, that's such an unreliable estimate because of the length of time. Yeah. So if you say my kid's at 50 and I want to be at 58, and in 4 weeks he's at 55 or 62, don't get too caught up. Set that goal for much longer. Yeah. And that's what happened with Aimline. Aimline, you can have 15 weeks worth of data, and then the last 3 were below the Aimline, and you throw out the previous 12 weeks and say, oh, the intervention's not working. Yeah. You got 12 weeks worth of data that shows it's working just fine. Yeah. So that's my issue with Aimline.
I mean, I just love what you said, like thinking is required. Mm-hmm. And then there's the end of the distribution that Rachel's talking about, where there's like no guidance. You're like out in the Wild West, I guess, trying to figure out how to do stuff. But then there's the other end of the spectrum where you have districts that are overzealously prescribing assessment procedures that you know to be redundant, not helpful. You know, maybe it's an F&P everybody's required to take, or maybe it's just like, you know, there are administrators out there in the world that believe if you've got 4 or 5 programs and they all require some estimate of reading proficiency, they think they have to give, you know, a different screening measure for reading to satisfy each of those requirements. Remember John Haas talked about that when we were all in Singapore together. I mean, I never thought about that before, but I have now seen it. I run into that. So, you know, I think part of the role of the school psychologist is to help people do the thinking and come back and say, you know, maybe just because it's kind of hot or popular or prescribed or unsupervised, thinking is required, and I need to vet this information and see, does it really help me help teachers get better results for kids? You know, like a real popular thing in this space is student growth percentiles. And a lot of systems just went all in, you know, because it's very seductive. I mean, you get a table, you can look it up. It looks very sophisticated. Theoretically, it addresses some of the concerns that, you know, like you've expressed before in monitoring growth and reading, Matt, for example. But the thing it ignores is it's really unstable. It's not a normal distribution of growth rates for any slice that you take. And the most important things that control what your growth is going to be are not represented in that number. So when you wash all that out and you just think there's that the only thing that matters is where you started, that's bad information. It's not better than just using ROI, you know, in general. So actually, like in our book, we say don't use it. We do not recommend the use of it. We said that at NASP last year, and people gasped in the room. And Tim Runge did a beautiful job talking about it and kind of laying out the logic. But student growth percentiles, those are a problem for me.
So what is the answer? I mean, if I'm in a district that we don't have local norms, I've just got a kid that I know is struggling. I want to see, you know, if we're making adequate progress. And so I have some time maybe to work with the student and to do progress monitoring. How do I know if that's good progress? That's not good progress? How?
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, like I bet Matt does this the same way I do because we've worked together a lot, which is, you know, if you know they're low, validating that they're lower in their class or lower relative to some state or national criterion is not that helpful. You already know that, right? But you also probably could characterize performance on that measure, whatever it is, that is highly predictive of other outcomes that you care about. So let me just talk about math. In math, what we care about is that children retain what they've learned. And because math is relentlessly hierarchical, right, we want them to be able to use what they've learned to acquire new understanding that happens in an easier, faster way for the child, right? Speed is ease in this space. So we also care about, do they pass and fail the year-end test? That's meaningful for kids. We care about other more distal outcomes, like do they meet the college readiness benchmarks on the ACT? Do they successfully enroll and complete college? Those would be the really distal kind of, ambitious, aspirational outcomes that we should definitely be about. And that's kind of easy to specify. And one of my favorite papers ever is Burns et al. Burns VanDerHeyden et al. 2006. That was a fine paper. And we looked at that. Remember, Matt? We looked at whether or not children who performed in certain fluency ranges had better skill retention 2-3 months later. I forget what the interval was. Did they have better performance in learning the next more complex skill? Specifically, we looked at multiplication 0 to 9 proficiency, so digits correct per 2 minutes. And then we looked at how that range of performers did when they encountered multi-digit multiplication. In kids who attained the sort of standard proficiency criteria that most of us use, had better success, fewer trials to criterion, reaching mastery on the multi-digit multiplication measure. So that again, I just want to say out loud, I know that idea absolutely came from Eric Houghton. It did not come from me and Matt. He was the first guy to do it, and it would have been in the 70s, looking at what he called the REAPS criteria. Actually, he called it the RAPS criteria, retention, application, performance standards. And then a guy named Carl Binder showed up and added a concept called endurance, and it became REAPS, the retention, endurance, application, performance standards. I think this is sort of what Acadience does. That's what their, probability of scoring proficient on a year-end test. To me, that's so much more useful than above the 25th percentile.
I couldn't agree more. Yes. And so Acadience and Dibbles, I think Easy CBM as well, there's no upfront cost. I'll say it that way, Amanda. There's no upfront cost. You can get these without paying anything. I didn't say for free. You can get these without paying anything. And they've got published criteria. And Acadience and others maybe do as well, base it on who's going to do on the state test. So if I work in districts that, and this is no longer the case because it's so easy to do, but if I worked in a district that had no CBM system in place and we had to create one, we would do that and then look at the kids who passed the state test and look at their rate of growth, and that was our goal.
Yep, bingo. That's how we do it too. Yep.
So are we ignoring questions from people? Should we be responding?
We probably are.
I know we only got a couple minutes left.
Oh gosh.
And someone just put on there like it's been 55 minutes. Like, no, it hasn't. Oh no.
Right, we're sort of shocked. It's been such a good discussion, and a lot of people are chiming in that they're really appreciating this, and we had a few people make some really interesting comments. One, our friend Tim McIver says, Dr. Burns, I saw you tweeted yesterday that schools in Mass are considering adopting F&P. It makes me wonder why districts aren't looking carefully enough at the data.
Well, John Hosp, so yes, what happened is I put that, a friend of mine, I won't say who it was, called me and said, hey, there's a large school in Massachusetts that's really thinking about doing this, adopting F&P. Have you heard about that? And I looked and didn't find information, but just put something out there and tagged some groups in Massachusetts and started an interesting conversation. And I sort of concluded it by quoting John Hosp and saying, you can't bring data to a dog.
Love that quote.
Right? I say it all the time. I always give you credit. You can't convince someone with data if their decision making isn't data based. So to answer your question is maybe it's a comment more than a question, to which I just have to agree. I don't know, but if they believe it, doesn't matter. Your data won't change their belief. Although I will say when I put that tweet out and I showed these three different sets of data and how they differed, etc., one person tweeted it back and said, "This has really made me rethink how I'm doing assessments." So that made my week. But I think showing it in real clear, people are impressed by data. They remember the stories. So showing the stories behind it. This is how these data hurt kids. Like that's, I think, our only chance. And showing real examples, not hypothetical ones.
Right.
Looked like Rachel, did you want to chime in? I can read another one. Corey Peltier had a couple of good comments. What advice do you have for school psychologists or special educators attempting to train other professionals to support administration of fidelity, specifically with like one-on-one administered assessments?
Well, Matt, you're a trainer. You should probably.
Yeah, but you've done this way more than I have. I knew you were
Oh,
gonna
that's
say
probably
that.
true.
You've done with thousands. I've done with like 10 students a year.
That is true because I'm training people who are teachers, more like frontline people, and you're training like the future researchers of the world. True, although you do as much training as I do out on the front line. Well, I mean, I'm happy to talk about it, but I do think like scripted procedures are always helpful. And Matt does a great job of having modeled examples, and I know we do that too, especially when we're running a research study where we will have people watch it and then they practice it. And then we have a script that we use on the day that we're actually working with students. But out in the field, like outside of research, I'll talk about how I do it in math. We know, like in my platform, we know when a teacher has never screened before. And so when that teacher clicks screening, a little video will come up. And it's just a little 2-minute video that explains how to do the screening. So my whole life has been trying to build things that help systems take more effective actions, right? Make it easier to do it the right way. And then the actual instructions are scripted right on the protocol. And we are even about to upload working the sample problem for every type of assessment we do so that the teacher could literally just show the video, because that will help standardize that piece. And then the teachers administer for 2 minutes, and most of the time for most grade levels, it's 4 minutes for the older kids, 1 minute for kindergarten. And we have an answer key, and it's no longer are we scoring digits correct. We are only scoring answers correct. I mean, that took years. It took 5 years to develop the correct answers equivalent, but answers are easier to score. So I think, training teachers with the actual scripted materials, providing either a live or a video model for support, and then trying to simplify everything around that. And I will say, like in systems, we always checked reliability, inter-rater reliability every single year. Even when we were just doing school-wide reading screening, we always checked reliability. And unfortunately, we often always saw drift. So we would just retrain.
So Amanda, you just described the learning hierarchy, right? When we're training teachers and adults, we should use the same principles we use when we teach kids. So I teach it to them with modeling, explicit instruction, immediate feedback, give them lots of practice, put in systems to generalize it, and reteach when needed.
I think, though, that most systems are very easy to uptake and administer assessment. It is not hard to train systems to do that. And I think what's really hard is the paralysis by analysis that can happen when they have so much data and then they don't know what to do next. I think that's our next thing to tackle.
Yep, agreed.
As far as like the little, you mentioned like videos on how to do things. Like I know that Easy CBM has those little videos that you can click on, and those are free. And so I like I like those, because if I'm a little bit like, oh, how does this go? Like I can click on the video and it'll show me exactly how it goes.
Yeah. Cool.
I had one quick question. I know we're out of time, but bear with me. When you were talking before about percent accuracy being not a good way to measure goals and things of that nature, so you were talking specifically like within like probes and dibbles and CBM, as far as like within that 1 minute span, correct? So that wasn't referring to like a word list of when you're the
Right.
goal is
Correct.
okay.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So the only time I use, if I'm using text-based reading, I'm almost always going to use an IEP goal that is fluency-based. If you're doing things like, the first 100 words or words with this sound, then I'll use accuracy, but it's going to be at least 90%.
Okay. And so if you have a student that's getting like a phonics intervention, would you use oral reading fluency to do that? Do you see that more as a measure of the fluency, or is that because it also, of course, encompasses phonics?
Yeah, no. So that's a general outcome measure. Okay. So, but there's two contexts there. If I'm a special ed teacher, let's take this one first. If I'm an interventionist doing tier 2 interventions for a kid to see if it's working in either tier 2, then I'm going to use grade level oral reading fluency. Now, if I'm a special ed teacher, then I'm going to use a more precise measure. So it's going to be nonsense word fluency or something like that instead.
I'm just going to put in the link really quickly if I can. How do I add a chat? Does it have to go in private, or can I do a chat?
I think
how to add a comment.
I think you have to have another tab open on the YouTube video.
Okay, I'll just put it in the private one, and then
Yes.
you guys, if you'll just
Yep.
share it to the other one. There are some really great case examples provided by Patton. That's the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network. And they have some wonderful examples about how to just, use proximal and slightly more distal, I will say target and generalization or goal measures to make an RTI decision. But that flows very nicely into how would you write IEP goals. And it's so formulaic. We've actually kicked around, it's an all-you-can-eat buffet of what we can put into spring math. And one of the things we kicked around is it's so formulaic, and we do offer advice, and we have some, targeted information in our support portal to help people do that work. But we could automate IEP objectives based on our diagnostic assessment inside the platform, because it tells us exactly what you need. Here's your intervention. We're measuring your target skill. We're measuring your slightly distal generalization skill. We're uploading your other test data from your school system to give your school program evaluation, but it's also attached to you as an individual kid. So that is a very, very easy way for us to say, these are the things you should be working on for IEP goals. I realized I remember doing some of this training, I think, for Laura Miller in Pennsylvania. So she may even have some ideas to share. She's a wonderful coach and trainer in MTSS. I can't remember if she works for Patton or if she works for one of the IUs in Pennsylvania, but she's a good resource too, Laura Miller. And that link, you'll find reading examples, math examples. I wrote the math examples. Should be helpful.
Oh my goodness, so much information. I could just listen, and I love the two of you going back and forth, and I'm just trying to follow. And so if anybody else is watching and a little bit like, oh, wait, this is one of those episodes I feel like we need to, rewatch in order to fully, absorb everything.
Yes.
So it's awesome.
I'm pretty sure Matt is my most frequent co-author for my whole career.
Yeah. I'm sure you're by far my most frequent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love it. And I know you have kind of a little bit of a competition over like what states you're all presenting in. And
do we still? I mean, no, Matt won. It's over.
Goodness, but yeah, the competitiveness. That's we'll keep tricking you back onto Psych Podcast here. We'll say, well, Matt's been on this many times. Yeah.
That would work. That would actually work. We just had Amanda for the 5th time. You've only done 4. Well, I'd be like, okay, book me tomorrow.
Okay, quick story. We are somewhere, Wisconsin, I think, we're both getting the same award, which bothers both of us. And when they read it, the bio, like in my bio, I said at that time, do you remember? I said how many states I had presented in, and Matt's like, you've presented in that many states? And he goes, all right, the first one to get New York wins. And of course he beat me, but I think you cheated because you probably had a lead on New York already. And for the record, I've virtually presented in New York, and I don't feel like that counts, but yeah. So Matt won. He's the winner.
That's awesome.
I had to remind myself, remember this is a public conversation. Keep it much more polite than, because you never called me a turkey once, so.
I know. Unusual. Yeah.
Good restraint.
Yeah.
Oh my
Awesome.
goodness. But
let me say out loud, Matt, you're just brilliant. And I tell you, you're one of my favorite colleagues and friends, and I adore you. You know that.
Same here. If I ever have an idea, I call Amanda to let her rip it to shreds, because she's much smarter at these things than I am.
Vice versa.
Always makes it better.
Oh my goodness. And you're both so generous with your time in coming on Psych Podcast, and you've both helped me with various, consultations and my own children and things, all the time. Like I send you both messages, and you're just awesome. So thank you and so if anybody, you're going to get all these floods of emails now with the audience members thinking, just emailing you all the time, but you're so generous with your time. So we appreciate that.
We appreciate everything this team does.
Yeah. I hate that we're over, and because I would go on forever, and I kind of thought that this would be a can of worms, but seeing what you thought about NASP's SLD position statement, I'd love to at one point have that conversation, but I think that'll have to be a whole nother episode. So
Perfect.
Yes, perhaps part 2.
yeah. But thank you so much. I don't see any last
Thank
minute
you.
questions, and we're 10 minutes over, so I really appreciate again everybody hanging out with us. So
Yeah.
have a good one.
And 2 weeks, we'll be back on October 16th with Dr. Byron McClure and Dr. Kelsey Reed, talking about their new book, Hacking Deficit Thinking. And the two of them are just on fire. If you see them on social media, if you've seen them present, they're just fantastic also. So please come back in a couple weeks. And we appreciate that you were all here. It was so nice to see all of, professors and friends chiming in as well. We love all of our comments. Yeah, Dr. Proctor.
Yeah.
And, yeah. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.